50 years ago, Ireland was one of the poorest countries in Western Europe. People were leaving in the millions. Farms were failing. There were more Irish-born people living outside Ireland than inside it. Today, Ireland has one of the highest GDP per capita numbers on the entire planet, richer, on paper, than the United States, than Germany, than Switzerland. But here's the strange part. If you fly into Dublin expecting Monaco-style luxury, you won't find it. You'll find normal houses, ordinary traffic jams, and a housing crisis so bad that young Irish people can't afford to buy a home in their own capital. So how did a small, rainy island with no oil, no major minerals, and a population smaller than New York City become one of the richest nations on Earth? And why does that number hide something most people never talk about? Stick around, because the answer to that second question is the real story here. To understand Ireland's rise, you have to understand how far down it started. For centuries, Ireland was ruled from London. Its land was owned by absentee landlords, and its economy was built almost entirely around agriculture, mostly to feed Britain, not itself. When the potato blight hit in the 1840s, the result was catastrophic. Roughly 1 million people died of starvation and disease. Another million fled. Ireland's population has still, to this day, not fully recovered from that single event. Independence came in 1922, but freedom didn't bring prosperity. For decades, Irish governments tried to protect their tiny economy behind high tariffs, discouraging foreign trade and foreign investment. The result was stagnation. By the 1950s, Ireland was losing people faster than almost any country in Europe. Entire villages emptied out. The joke at the time was that Ireland's biggest export wasn't butter or beer. It was its own people, shipped off to Boston, London, and Sydney. By the late 1980s, unemployment in Ireland was above 17%. National debt was spiraling. Economists at the time didn't call Ireland an economic story. They called it an economic warning. Nobody in 1987 would have predicted what came next. The turning point wasn't a natural resource. It was a decision. In the late 1950s, a civil servant named T.K. Whitaker proposed something radical for Ireland at the time. Stop protecting the economy and open up instead. Cut tariffs. Welcome foreign companies. Compete for investment. It took decades to fully pay off. But by the time Ireland joined the European Economic Community, the predecessor to EU, in 1973, the foundation was set. Membership gave Irish exporters free access to hundreds of millions of European consumers. Suddenly, a company based in Ireland wasn't just selling to a small island of a few million people. It was selling to an entire continent. Then came the second piece of the strategy, corporate tax. Ireland set its corporate tax rate at just 12.5%, far below most of Western Europe, where rates often sat above 30%. For an American technology or pharmaceutical company deciding where to build its European headquarters, the math was simple. Build in Ireland, get full access to the EU market, and pay a fraction of the tax you'd pay almost anywhere else. English-speaking workforce, EU membership, low taxes, a stable, English common law legal system familiar to American business. It was, for U.S. multinationals, close to the perfect launchpad into Europe. Companies like Apple, Google, Meta, Pfizer, and dozens of others didn't just open small offices in Dublin. They built their European headquarters there and booked an enormous amount of international profit through Irish subsidiaries. That single decision changed everything. Through the 1990s and early 2000s, Ireland experienced what became known as the Celtic Tiger, one of the fastest economic growth periods any developed nation has ever recorded. Between 1995 and 2000, the Irish economy grew by an average of nearly 10% per year. For comparison, most wealthy countries consider 3% growth to be a good year. Foreign direct investment poured in. Unemployment, which had been above 17%, fell below 4%. For the first time in generations, young Irish people weren't leaving. They were coming home. Immigration reversed. Dublin transformed from a quiet capital into a genuine European tech and finance hub. Of course, it wasn't a perfectly smooth ride. A massive property bubble built up alongside the boom. And when the 2008 financial crisis hit, Ireland's banking system nearly collapsed entirely. The country needed an €85 billion bailout from the EU and IMF. For a few years, it looked like the Celtic Tiger story might end in disaster. But Ireland recovered faster than almost anyone expected, largely because of the foundation underneath the crisis. The corporate tax model and the multinational presence never actually left. By the mid-2010s, Ireland's economy was roaring again, and this time, even bigger, which brings us to the strange twist in this story. Here's the part most videos about Ireland skip entirely. Ireland's GDP per capita numbers are, in a very real sense, an illusion when Apple, Google, or Pfizer books billions of dollars in profit through an Irish subsidiary. That profit counts toward Ireland's gross domestic product, even if the actual economic activity, the research, the manufacturing, the sales, happen somewhere else entirely. The money simply passes through Irish accounts for tax purposes. This effect is so extreme that economists actually had to invent a new statistic just to make sense of it. In 2015, Ireland's official GDP grew by over 25% in a single year, a number so absurd that one economist called it Leprechaun Economics. It wasn't real growth. It was a single pharmaceutical company relocating its intellectual property to Ireland on paper. Because GDP had become so distorted, Ireland's central bank now publishes a separate figure called Modified Gross National Income, or GNI asterisk, specifically designed to strip out these accounting effects and show what the Irish economy actually looks like on the ground. And by that measure, Ireland is still a wealthy, successful country, but nowhere near the global outlier that raw GDP numbers suggest. So when you see headlines claiming Ireland is richer than America, what you're really seeing is a tax and accounting phenomenon layered on top of a genuinely impressive, but much more ordinary economic success story. The real Ireland isn't a tiny nation that magically became the richest place on earth. It's a smart, well-educated, strategically positioned country that made a series of deliberate policy bets and then got a massive statistical boost from being the preferred tax address of the world's biggest corporations. So is Ireland rich? Genuinely, yes. Wages are high, unemployment is low, and living standards have transformed since the 1980s. But is it the wealthiest country on earth, like the headline statistics claim? Not quite. It's something more interesting. A small country that turned tax policy into its greatest natural resource. What do you think? Is Ireland's model a smart strategy other small countries should copy? Or is it a bubble waiting to pop if global tax rules change? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this, hit like, subscribe to Atlas Aura, and turn on notifications. We break down the economics, geography, and history behind countries like this every single week.